Hello, this is Josh Findlay, host of the Election Protection Podcast, where we talk all things election integrity. Back for season 2, the midterms. And we are joined today by a dear friend of mine, Janelle King. Janelle serves on the State Board of Elections for Georgia, but we go back a lot farther than that. I don't know how much of that we're going to get into today, but we are excited for the work that she is doing. Janelle, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Josh. I'm happy to be here. And I hope we do go back a little bit into how far our relationship goes, because it certainly is one.
For the record, we work together as low-level staffers in state in the state Republican Party there. We worked together on some very interesting election integrity things in the 2018 governor's race before election integrity was cool.
Yep.
And I think that gave us a unique perspective that we've brought to where we are now. But Janelle, on this podcast, we don't do traditional introductions. We let the guest tell us a little bit about their background. So why don't we dive into that and tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Absolutely. I have to start by saying that Josh was my absolute favorite boss. And I know he's probably going to start laughing. I knew you were going to start laughing because it was such a stressful environment. But the way that you pushed me to be better, to do better, to kind of stretch myself, I still use that to this day. And I think it attributes to a lot of successes that I'm seeing. So I'm so grateful for that. And I'm thankful for our friendship. That being said, I started out in politics working completely behind the scenes, just interning as the young Republican that was moving the chairs, setting up the tables, doing all that stuff. And then as a result of just working hard, I really got bit by the political bug. So I just stayed in the game for a very, very long time, which led me to eventually becoming a regional field director with the state GOP. And as a result of that, I think what really happened was I was working with some other people, and we would have our staff meetings. And like I said, Josh was a tough boss. You know, he wanted things to be right. And so during those staff meetings, they got a little long-winded when people weren't prepared. So we would meet beforehand and then to just make sure that we were tightening it up. And then we would go into our staff meetings. And then as a result of all of that, we were able to win elections. They made me the deputy state director of the party. And so I just learned so much behind the scenes. At the end of working with the state party, I then went into media, which was completely unexpected, but I was asked to join the Georgia Gang here in Georgia. And that was a political commentating show, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. I was one of the Republicans. We battled it out, and then national media saw me, and I started doing political commentating. So now I am a radio host of my show, The Janelle King Show, as well as I do political commentating. And now I am on the state election board. And that has been a heck of a journey, one that I will not trade. I've learned a lot, but I'm so happy to be there. I didn't realize how necessary my position was, but now I am fully involved.
It's kind of a great political story, right? Start out behind the scenes, and now here you are in front of the camera all the time, right?
Yes.
And it's kind of incredible. You're an entity unto yourself, but it just goes to show how much you learn from putting in work early in your career, how it can bear fruits later. So that's awesome, you know. So let's start a little bit talking about the State Board of Elections. Different states have different boards of election, right? For example, Wisconsin has the Wisconsin Election Commission, which is a very powerful board. Prior to, I would say, 2021, Georgia had a state board of elections, but it wasn't very powerful, right? What changed to give the Georgia State Board of Elections more authority post-2020 election?
So there were 2 bills that were passed, SB 202 and SB 189. Each of those bills kind of shaped the state election board that we see today. One of the bills separated the state election board from the Secretary of State's office and from being underneath their umbrella. And then the other bill removed the Secretary of State from being the chair of the board. I think both of those was necessary because it almost felt as though the fox was guarding the hen house. You know, we would have investigations and we would see things things that would come before us, and people would complain about one agency, and then it would, it would kind of put us in a tight position. So when that separation took place, it shifted the board, or it should have shifted the board, to where it was more balanced, and we were able to overlook and oversee elections and hear in cases where there may have been fraud. So another aspect of the state election board is to create rules around state codes. So whereas things may be a little confusing as it relates to how to actually administer a state code, we will kind of tighten it up and provide those rules. That being said, right now, our state board is made up of 5 individuals. The chairman is appointed by the governor, and then the other appointments come from the lieutenant governor, which is Rick Jeffries on our board. Dr. Jan represents the Republican Party. We have Sarah Gazal, who represents the Democrat Party, and then I represent the House Republicans. So, well, the House in general, not just House Republicans. We have a majority, but I represent the House, and I was appointed by the Speaker Burns.
Perfect. Thank you. So just to make sure that I'm clear on this, when the bills were passed post-2020 election, you had the Secretary of State, who typically ran the elections in Georgia, right? Had a lot of authority and a lot of power.
Yes.
If we remember politically, there were some people in the Georgia state legislature that weren't thrilled with the work that Brad Raffensperger was doing.
Yeah.
So we separated out the State Board of Elections to make it be its own entity, right? Not under the oversight necessarily of the Secretary of State.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about how that has played out in practice since then.
Wow, it's been interesting, So when I was appointed to the board, I was one of those people who were looking at all the information that was coming, right? But a lot of it was in the media. There was a lot of grassroots people. It felt really convoluted as it relates to 2020 election integrity and just the whole conversation. So I felt initially like, maybe we should move on. It happened. Let's look at other things. And so when I was appointed to the board, I decided that the best thing to do is to come with fresh eyes. I knew that I would get more information. I knew I would have access to people who were working on this for years. And so I went there with fresh eyes. And doing so, I met some people who said, Janelle, you're the swing vote. And I didn't know what that meant. It felt a little weird at first, because I realized, I thought to myself, well, this is a majority Republican board. It should be fun and easy. We all kind of agree on things. Well, little did I know that was not the case. So I get on the board, and what I started realizing as I started listening to people is that there were some irregularities. There are some issues. There are some major issues. I found out that we were behind, about 600 cases behind of investigations, and that the Attorney General's office was behind, I think, 160 cases that was sent from us to them to investigate. So stuff like that started causing me to really dig deeper into this. And I think what really put me on the path of becoming someone who was just really dogmatic about pushing election integrity was when I started noticing that I would start asking questions. I would ask people that are supposed to know things, certain stuff, and then I would get pushback, or I would get opinions instead of facts. And it looked very weird, to say the least. And so for me, going on the board now and being a part of this board, I started to, it causes me to really think deep about where we are as far as the state of our elections. Can it be better? When I hear people say things like, "Oh, there's a little fraud in every election," I think that's a little lazy to me. I'm like, there shouldn't be any fraud in our elections. So it caused me to really want to be a part of be a part of the solution, and not necessarily just talking about the problem.
There's a lot to unpack there. So you told us earlier that one of the main functions of the State Board of Elections is oversight of the elections in the state. Why do you think it was so far behind on investigations when you joined? And the reason I say that is, one thing that we believe fully on this podcast is in transparency, right? I have for years had a quote on my wall that says, you can find a conspiracy anywhere if you don't understand how things work, right?
Yeah.
Um, why were they so far behind on these investigations?
You know, two things come to mind: funding, as well as just people that just really didn't see it as that important, you know. But to talk about the funding side of it, you know, they separated us and created this board, but they didn't give us much funding. We found out that the Cannabis Commission had more money than we did, and they were much smaller than us. We were given just enough to have, you know, one executive director, a paralegal, but we didn't have any investigators of our own. We had to rely on the Secretary of State's investigators, and that those were the people who were doing these investigations. And to their credit, I know they worked super hard, but there's only a handful of them as well. So when you have about, you know, thousands of cases coming before you, or potential fraud, and they have to go out and investigate each and every one of them, and he's only about 4 or 5 investigators, that's how you get backed up. So it wasn't managed properly. I don't know if it was because people just didn't take it seriously, but I just know that the funding resources were not there, or if the funding was, it wasn't being used adequately. And then secondly, I do think that we have to have a conversation about those who are in power, who are elected, who are supposed to be looking over these agencies, and whether or not they see it as a priority. In some cases, they look at, you know, someone may double vote once or twice, and in their mind, if it doesn't affect the outcome of the election, then it's not something that we should address. But that's only when you're looking from a very macro level, and when you're looking at these large races that are statewide and federal. But if you drill down into these local races, where we have city council members who are losing by 11 and 9 votes, though that little bit of fraud matters. And when you have people voting in one county and they live in another, but yet they're now helping make decisions for that other county or that other city, that's not fair. That's now disenfranchising those who live there. So we just what I believe the majority of the board today sees is that we shouldn't just look at it from a macro view. It's not the state races and the federal races that matter the most. They all matter.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, you know, one thing that the media likes to say is that there's no fraud in elections. And what they mean is maybe there's not fraud that affects the outcome
Right.
of elections. But to your point, some of these elections just get very close.
Yeah.
And, you know, 10 votes here, even 100 votes there, things like that, it matters. You know, it brings to mind this incident that happened recently with the 20,000 driver's licenses that the FBI found, right? Where they wanted to, this was part of a Chinese plot to illegally vote by mail in the elections.
Yeah.
The FBI didn't investigate it, probably because 20,000 votes doesn't seem like a lot. But when you look at the margin in some of these states, it really matters.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that the board is taking that micro approach to look at fraud.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about how you were appointed to the State Board of Elections. Because I think a lot of people would say, you know, the board was created to have oversight over elections, and it was not doing that for a while in Georgia. So tell us a little bit about how you were appointed and how people are appointed generally to the Board of Elections.
Yeah, you know, I'm a woman of faith, and so I like to say it's my Esther moment because I was just doing my little thing on the Georgia Gang, commentating, and, you know, having my opinions out there, and then I get a call that, you know, from some member of our team that just said, hey, you know, the Speaker of the House is looking to appoint you to the state election board. And I must say, I hadn't followed the state election board that much. I wasn't as detailed and involved in it. I was kind of looking at things from just small portions because we talk about a lot of different things in media. However, when I got that call, I then started looking into it. And the first thing I noticed was it was difficult for me to find a website for the agency. I had to go through the Secretary of State's office, and it just felt a little wonky. And so I think that was my first indicator that, you know, this was probably a little bit more work than I anticipated, but I'm up for the challenge. So I was ready to go and do it. So, and then I got a phone call from the Speaker of the House. And that call was extremely impactful to me because one of the things that I always listen for when someone asks me to do something is whether or not I will have full control to do what you're asking me to do. And when I spoke with him, he said, I am not going to mess with you. I'm not going to be involved. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I want you to just go out there. And what registered to me was the last thing that he said, which was, I want you to do the right thing. And that is what I plan to do. And that is what I'm doing. So when I joined the board, we went through all the swearing in and all of that. And not only that, I had a meeting with the speaker prior to swearing in. And during that meeting, I told him, I said, one of the things that I'm noticing right now, right off the bat, I haven't attended one meeting yet, but I'm noticing something. And that's that it feels like the state election board is still under the control of the Secretary of State. We are using their investigators. Our website is on their website. There's not much of a clean break. And so I told him, I said, I hope that you can support me because I'm going to push for a clear separation of these two powers to make sure that we are looking at elections and we're doing it the best way possible because you told me to do the right thing. So that was our meeting. And ever since then, I've been on the board and been fighting for what's right.
It's really encouraging, actually, for us to hear that the speaker told you that. One thing that we firmly believe is that the way that we process our elections should not be political, right? We should follow best practices.
Right.
This should be, listeners have heard me say this many times, this should be an accounting exercise.
Yeah.
It's a vote is essentially a transaction between a person and their government.
Yeah.
And we can count everything else in the world, right? We can have our transactions with Walmart with paper and plastic and credit cards, everything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it works. Government should work the same way with our votes. So I'm encouraged to hear that. Tell us, though, about how has this fight been trying to get that separation?
It's been a lot harder than I thought it would be and a lot harder than I think it has to be. It makes me question a lot. When I had my first meeting, the first thing I asked was, why are we so intertwined with the Secretary of State's office? And our chairman said to me, well, we need them and we have to be connected to them. And I said, well, that's kind of breaking the law at this point, right? Because we have bills that have passed and that were signed off on that says that we should be separated. So it kind of started this tug and pull between, those who felt like, yeah, we're separated, but equal, right? Like we should still be a part of the Secretary of State's office. And then those of us on the board who felt like, no, we can stay on our own 2 feet. We just need to build it out and we can create a strong agency. And I think that pull has been what has really kickstarted some of the fights that we've seen take place on the board. But not only that, but I came in during a major presidential election year. And so the Democrat Party was really trying to hold on to the White House. And I know that elections as a whole is not partisan at all, and it shouldn't be partisan. But there was a group of people who decided to make it partisan. So they started saying things like, those of us who were voting for transparency, for independency, that were supporting rules that would tighten up our elections a little bit more, that we were doing that in order to help benefit the Republican Party. And numerous times I said, that's impossible. The rules that we are supporting, the investigations that are coming before us are all associated with the overall election process. It's impossible for us to create a rule that will only benefit one candidate. So although we were saying that, it created more and more, it just kind of picked up steam. It picked up steam. And so we ended up getting sued about 7 times. I'd never been sued in my life, Josh. I was like, wait, I'm being served now in my driveway. It's the weirdest thing. So, but we fought through that because we knew what we were doing was right. And one of the rules that or I should say, there were two rules that got a lot of traction and was the center of a lot of lawsuits. One was our certification, what they call the certification rule, but it was the right to inquire. We had the election boards who had to sign these illegal documents saying that the election is free of fraud, free of error, and ran perfectly. But yet they did not have access to any of the documents or any of the data that proves that what they're signing is accurate. So what we decided was, yeah, this rule that came before us from the public that said that the election boards should have the opportunity to review all documentation prior to signing this legal document that can put them in legal jeopardy. We decided that was a good rule. We decided the rules stated it had to be done within the certification period and that there would be no interruptions with certification. They still had to sign their document should everything pan out. That being said, it just kind of went off the rails and it became a huge topic. The second rule was our hand count rule. What we found was one of the major issues or mistakes that took place in previous elections, not just 2020, but also 2018, and even going back to 2016, was that we saw that there were times where individuals and the election office would count the ballots by hand, just say they count a couple of ballots by hand or one precinct, and they would notice that the total number of ballots in their hand didn't match the total number of ballots that was on the digital scanner. And that's a problem. The count has to match. And this was something that would take place on a precinct level, but it wouldn't be addressed or attempted to be addressed until it reached the Secretary of State's office, which is the state level. But we all know it's so difficult to find the problem when you are looking at it from the top. So we felt that the hand count rule that was presented to us by an election director that required all precincts to hand count the number of pieces of paper that's inside that scanner to ensure it matches the number of people who checked in on election day. We thought that was a good rule. We looked at the average number of ballots. We saw that it was around 100 or so ballots that each precinct will be counting. I think the most we saw was 1,500, and that was in Fulton County. So we gave them an extra day to do it. But either way, it was a very simple rule that would have addressed a major problem. Both of those rules were challenged. Both of those rules were shot down by the courts. I'm still amazed at how quickly the judge came out with his whole, his writings as to why he can't support the rules. I think it was within 15 minutes of the case being heard, but I don't know. Either way, that happened, and then it went all the way to the Georgia Supreme Court, and they said that even though the state code says that we should be making rules, they think that the legislators should do it instead of us. So, so that's where we are. But those are the two rules that I stand by, and I still hope that we can get them in.
I'm glad you went there because I want to talk a little bit about these, especially that first one, that certification rule, right? So first of all, when you voted on that as a board to pass it, that was not the first time that it had come before the board.
No.
Right?
No.
That had been before the board before you were on there.
Yeah.
And let's reiterate, I think it's important that we break this down, right? What that rule is just saying is that local election administrators, right, at the county level, they have a requirement to certify the elections, to say that the elections were performed without fraud.
Yes.
But they had been given guidance that said that essentially this was an administrative task, that they can't ask questions about how the election happened. Right. They couldn't get basic information about how the election happened.
Right.
And yet they were supposed to certify that these elections went off smoothly without a hitch. And your rule said, no, these election administrators should be allowed to ask questions about what happened in their local elections. Right. If I'm understanding, that's kind of a basic summary of the rule.
Yes.
Before you are on the board, though, This rule had been rejected by the board. Tell us why. What happened there?
So prior to me getting on the board, there was a majority of three. Obviously, it's five of us, so the majority is typically three. It was a majority of three of us. I mean, of three board members who were all voting seemingly together, and it was the Democrat appointee Sarah Gazal, the governor's appointee Chairman Fervier, and then Ed Lindsay, who was appointed by the Speaker of the House, and that is who I replaced. Now, I had no idea that it was happening the way it was happening. But when I started looking back, once I got appointed, I started looking back at those other board meetings, and I couldn't understand why it felt like every single rule was being shot down. It was almost as if there was this fear that, if we pass any rule, there's going to be a lawsuit, or if we do anything, then there's going to be these big issues. And these rules seem very common sense. I mean, it seems like it was something that would help rather than hurt or harm. And we had evidence to prove that there were cases where if these rules were in place, then some of these other errors wouldn't have occurred. So it did not make sense to me. I can't, and I won't, go into anyone's head as to what they were thinking, but it felt as though there was more of a push towards being more ceremonial. We're sitting up here, we're listening to cases, we're being this election board, but we're not really exuding any power. We're not doing anything. And so when I got on the board, I said, I'm going to look at this with clear eyes. And I started reading it. I was asking questions. And I think it was reading the opposition that forced me or pushed me in a position or pushed me towards supporting the rule, because the opposition seemed very, very vanilla. It was just kind of like, hey, I just don't like this because I think it's going to, make people who are already tired do extra work. And I'm like, well, okay, well, we need to find people who are awake. I mean, I don't know. That's a simple fix. And then there was whenever I would email the Attorney General's office and ask them to provide me with a law, with a fact, I ran down the list. Give me the proof, the evidence, the receipts, every timelines. I need it all. I was like, show it to me, and I will absolutely stand with you. They gave me an opinion. And so, and I said, with all due respect to the Attorney General's office, I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm asking for actual proof and evidence and as to why we should not support this rule. I could never get it. So that made me feel as though this is just, people who either have their own personal agenda as to why they don't want to do it or whatever it is, but it wasn't enough to cause me to stand on the other side. So I supported the rule. And then I started looking at other rules. And what I started noticing is that there were several rules that kept coming before us. So now it went from all the rules being shot down, it's seeming like anything that was focused on election integrity was pushed to the side. People who wanted to speak on behalf of analysts and investigators and those who have really been doing research in this, they were being told they couldn't speak. They were giving them 2 minutes instead of 15 minutes. And I'm like, it was just a fight. Matter of fact, my first board meeting, there was a gentleman who wanted to speak for about 20 minutes because he had presented some data. And when he presented it at a previous meeting, there was a follow-up meeting where the Secretary of State's office presented their, rebuttal to what he said. And he felt as though he should be able to respond to what they said. And I was being told, we're not going to allow that to happen. And I asked our chairman, I said, well, he only wants 15 minutes. Like, why can't we just give him a few minutes? I mean, these people pay for the house that we're sitting in. Like, we work for them. And then he immediately sent us into an executive session within 10 minutes of the board meeting starting. And the emotions that erupted in that executive session was shocking to me. I didn't understand why it was so hard to just give this gentleman 15 minutes. And I like to say that was my first vote, because in that executive session, I told him, I said, well, Mr. Chair, we will have to overrule you because we think he should speak. As a result, he was able to speak. And I saw the pressure begin to release a little bit in the room because now we were giving the voice of the people, we were giving it back to them. We were allowing them to speak. So from there on, it appeared like there was like the Three Musketeers is what we were called. I think President Trump called us the pit bulls for election integrity. But the three of us, we didn't mean to all stand together. It just kind of fell like that. And as a result, now the majority of the board is doing kind of the opposite. We're passing more rules than we are denying them, and I think that's what we're supposed to be doing.
So I think it's important to emphasize here that the board is taking 180-degree shifts
Yeah.
in its positions in favor of transparency. And I mean, look, we know what the other side is going to say,
Yeah.
that if you give local election officials power to look at their elections, they're going to disrupt elections. They're going to delay results, things like that. I think the counter to that is when you provide people clear guidance and you let them investigate, you get clarity on the results, and it provides real finality
Yeah.
a lot faster. So I think those pushes for transparency are important.
Yeah.
And
The
then
public
just
didn't
to
feel that
dive in,
way. The public didn't feel that way at all. When I spoke to the public and I asked them about how they felt about these rules, you'd be surprised, but so many people said, "Well, look, we already wait 2 weeks for results. What's another few days?" They felt like if it means we're going to have accurate and clear and integral elections, then yeah, by all means, take your time. So it wasn't the public that had an issue.
well, I think that's exactly right. I mean, what we've seen over and over again, everywhere from recent presidential elections to what happened recently in California,
Yeah.
the longer it takes to get your results out,
Hmm.
um, but without getting questions
Yeah.
answered,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
That leads to confusion.
Absolutely.
When there is a clear timeline and a clear process that is being followed
Yeah.
that includes the ability to answer questions,
Hmm.
um, people trust the election results
They do.
just a lot more. It's when things get drawn out, but everything happens behind closed doors
Right.
that people have a problem.
Right. And it's supposed to be transparent. That's the funny part is that the election process is supposed to be one of the most transparent processes there is. And it feels as though it's like, hey, everyone, you just do your duty. We'll handle it over here. And I'm like, that's not the way it's supposed to be. We are a representative republic. I need to be a part of every aspect of you representing me, and I'm supposed to.
So going forward, right? What are some of the big changes you would like to see in Georgia election, either law, something that has to come through the legislature, or rulemaking? But what are some of the biggest improvements that need to happen in Georgia going forward?
I think that specifically the two rules that I spoke of should and they have to be in place. I think it's the start of us really bringing the public back together. When individuals feel like they can't trust elections, it opens the door up for voter apathy. And voter apathy is not good for anyone, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on. We want every single voter to participate. Matter of fact, it's our duty to participate. If we don't vote and we don't decide who is representing us, then we're going to get whatever we get. And whenever you have individuals who are supposed to be in leadership and supposed to ensure that this transparency is taking place so that people can feel comfortable voting, we're not doing that, it sets us off into the wrong direction. And we're going down a wrong path now. So for me, the future of the state election board and Georgia elections, what I would like to see is, number one, those two rules become laws if that's what needs to happen. Secondly, we are already doing this. We advocated for more money, and we did get an additional $600,000 into our budget. Now we were told we couldn't hire with it, but we did have a little bit of extra money on the side that we did have that we can hire with. So we said, all right, let's shift operations over there. But we did get additional $600,000. We have hired two new investigators with our previous funding. So now the state election board has our own investigators. We finally have an office. Can you believe it? We didn't even have an office. Our executive director was working in the cafeteria. I know we finally have an office. We have a brand new executive director. Our former executive director took another job, a fabulous job. He was wonderful. I called him my Mordecai because he helped me learn how to navigate this process. But he was wonderful. But when he gets offered another opportunity, he took it. So we have a new executive director, former Representative James Mills. He's doing a fabulous job. We finally have funding to have our own website. So we're in the process of building that, really getting that going. So right now, the focus is further establishing the state election board as its own entity, and then getting these rules passed that needs to be passed. And then lastly, I think there does need to be a little bit of a focus on the election workers and making sure that they're adequately supported, because they have a lot of stress on them. And if you don't have the right support, it can be a very difficult job. And we can't afford to have people quit that's been there for 18, 20 years, who knows how the process is supposed to go, because it can be a little bit complicated.
I think now is an appropriate time to bring up and focus on something that you said in there, that better rules lead to increased participation.
Yes.
Atlanta just hosted the baseball All-Star game. If you remember that when the SB 202, the big election bill post 2020, was passed, first of all, MLB withdrew.
Yep.
Nothing has fundamentally changed since they brought the All-Star game back.
No.
The only thing that has changed is that voter participation in Georgia has actually increased since that law was passed. And so I guess now baseball thought it was okay to bring it back since they saw that nothing happened. But in my opinion, that was a bunch of showboating that, I don't know, just didn't benefit anybody. But I think it's important to emphasize really that better laws lead to increased confidence. Better rules lead to increased confidence, and that leads to increased turnout.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you this, Janelle. We have another big race coming up, a Senate race in 2026. Georgia, I mean, for the last couple of Senate races, they've just been intense.
Yes.
What can we expect election integrity-wise from that race? What do you think are going to be the big issues that either, election integrity advocates need to watch out for, or what can we anticipate from that race?
I'm so encouraged about where we are right now. And the reason why is because election integrity now is no longer the fringe topic on the side. I think now we are holding these candidates' feet to the fire. If you are not going to operate within the bounds of election integrity, then we don't want you. That is what the people are supposed to do. And so as I've been traveling throughout the state, talking to different groups and educating them on what we do at the state election board, my main focus has been empowering the voter to do your duty. Hold these people feet to the fire. Look at every single person in that race. Do not pass up this primary opportunity. I think we've got very comfortable in just kind of skipping over primaries and then showing up and being more communicable during the general election. No, we need to make sure our voices are heard in these primaries. We need to ensure that every single person running understands what we want. And we need to make sure that we are not supporting people who are just talking about doing things, or supporting people who have ran the ball to the end zone, but hasn't actually crossed it. We're just running towards the end zone, but we're not actually getting in it. No, we're tired of that. We've got to support people that's going to get the ball into the end zone. And so I'm encouraged. My encouragement and my advice to the election advocates and those who are advocating for election integrity specifically is to not let up. Stay keeping this your focus. Stay on top of your election boards. Go to your election meetings. Hold these candidates accountable. That is what I think is the best decision that we can make right now, because we are so close to being able to elect people who care about these type of issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I were looking forward to the races in 2026, I think the things that I am really encouraged by, one, are the composition of election
Yeah.
administrators. I think one, the state election board really drawing attention to these issues and taking votes like y'all are taking now,
Hmm.
super important.
Hmm.
I think you look at Fulton County, who now has some real election integrity advocates
Yeah.
on its board of elections,
Hmm.
is absolutely key.
Yeah.
And then I think looking at what's happening on the ground. I mean, look, we always need more poll workers,
Yeah.
always need more poll watchers.
Yeah.
But the amount of participation that there has been in the last few elections compared to what was happening,
Hmm.
6 years ago, it's like night and day.
Yeah.
And you and I both can speak from experience and say that there's still attempts at shenanigans in these
Yep.
races, right? I don't know if we're going to call it fraud. I don't know what we're going to call it, right? But
Irregularities.
that's right. Irregularities. That's a good word. But having good people in place allows us to catch this stuff early
Yeah.
and not influence the election. So I am very encouraged for 2026.
Yeah.
Before we end here, and you've been an incredible guest, let's talk a little bit about the Georgia Supreme Court decision
Yeah.
that affected y'all. Because like you said,
Mhm.
it did overturn these rules that y'all passed.
Yeah.
What does this mean for you, and what is it going to mean for elections that Georgia's courts keep taking these, what we would say, are anti-transparency positions?
Yeah. It's funny. I like to start with the opener, so to speak, before the decision was rendered. And the opening statements, a lot of the messaging was that they thought these rules were good rules. They felt like these rules would be helpful. And so, what the Supreme Court initially said was that they felt as though the rules should come from the legislators. Now, it wasn't all of them. Some of these rules did pass that they felt were strong and that we can administer. However, their biggest focus was whether or not we were legislating. And I still disagree with that decision. I absolutely am not a legislator. And all of the rules, when we decided to support them, we supported them with a state code, a law that was already on the books to back it up. So it wasn't like we were creating a new rule. We were defining the process and making sure it was uniformed. I went on a radio station to talk about specifically the hand count rule, and I had a woman call in from another county that said, "Hey, are you saying we're no longer going to hand count our ballots at the end of the night to ensure it matches the poll pads?" And I said, "Well, actually, the rule is creating a uniform process." And I said, "Well, what county are you in?" And she was in one of the largest counties that we have. And her message was that, we've been doing this. So part of the reason why we wanted the rule to pass was because we felt like having a universal rule, making sure that all counties are doing the same thing, was very important. And so I'm hoping that will continue as well. But anyway, I will say that when I look overall, when it comes to the Supreme Court, I'm going to keep passing rules. We're going to keep doing what we do. They didn't say that we couldn't pass rules. They just want us to look at these rules to ensure that they're not closely related to legislating. And so we'll just keep going. And if they don't like us, they'll just slap us on the hand and we'll take that slap and keep moving. But I'm not going to let up. I'm not going to slow down. And we're not going to stop protecting our elections. We have to do it.
Such an important stance to take. One thing that really frustrates me in election integrity is that our side, we're so afraid of losing in court sometimes that we don't take chances.
Yep.
So keep it up.
Yep.
Keep it up, Janelle. All right. Last question. As you said, you were appointed during a presidential election year.
Yeah.
You got a shout out from a very big person on the state board. Tell us a little bit about what that was like to have Donald Trump paying attention to what happens on a state board of elections.
You know, it's funny. I was actually watching TV and watching something else, and I think I remember watching Columbo, which is like one of my favorite shows from like the 80s. But and Kelvin, our phone, my husband, our phones just started blowing up, and we're getting text messages and text. I'm like, what happened? I didn't know what happened. I wasn't at the rally when it occurred, obviously. So when I got it and I was able to see the clip and saw it, the first thought I thought was, oh boy, this is gonna be one. I'm like, oh, they're gonna get us. But then the second thought was, thank you, Mr. President. For one, thank you for caring about this. Thank you for putting your reputation on the line in order to push this topic. We saw this happen with Stacey Abrams. We saw it happen with Hillary Clinton, and they got praised for challenging the election. But then President Trump says it, and then all of a sudden he's vilified, and he's now, trying to steal the election. It's just craziness. So I felt this encouragement to stand in my courage and continue to fight for this. I always jokingly, I said, my Rhodesian probably didn't like that I was called a pit bull, but either way, I was just excited to be a part of a group of people who were assisting with such a extremely important part of our country, and that is our elections. Without elections, without fair elections, we do not have a country. And we've seen that when you look globally. So I'm just happy to be a part of it. Thank you, Mr. President, for noticing what we were doing and giving us that necessary reinforcement to continue to do what's right.
That's awesome, Janelle. What an incredible experience.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up here, is there anything else that you want our listeners or Georgia citizens to know about their elections?
My only message is please be kind to our election workers. Please know that many of them are not political. Many of them are just going to work every day. They are legitimately trying to, ensure that elections take place. And without them, we don't have a process. We need people to administer them. So my message is to, love on your election workers, be kind to them, push them to show them that they have your support, because that then encourages them to continue to do what's right. And then lastly, don't let up. Hold every candidate's feet to the fire and pay attention to primaries.
That is a great message to end on. Janelle, where can people find you on social media or your State Board of Elections week?
Yes, so you can Google our Georgia State Board of Elections. You can Google my name, and a lot of my stuff comes up. On social media, I'm just Janelle King, and my handle is IAM_Janelle K. So very easy to find.
Janelle, you've been a wonderful guest. Good luck going into this next midterm election, and thank you for all you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Josh.
This is Josh Findlay with the Election Protection Podcast. Thank you for joining us.